Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, it's great to see so many people that I recognize and also people I don't recognize, which is good. My name is Eric Reed, and I'm head of sales at TrueLark, and we're going to start with maybe just a little housekeeping about what we're going to do this morning and talk about that. So obviously we have a theme for today. Will AI eliminate front office? And we'll get into that. We're going to have a little bit of a spiel for me. I'm going to introduce our panel, and then really it's less about me talking about TrueLark. I can do that all day long, but I'm sure you guys didn't show up to necessarily hear that. We have some wonderful panelists that are coming from a couple different organizations, plus our own kind of product, to really kind of share their real world experience implementing AI and kind of impacts that it's had on their operations, as well as maybe their way of thinking and how it has impacted their strategy moving forward. So I like to generally have these sessions as, kind of interactive. It's kind of a small intimate group, so feel free to chime in, ask questions. We'll, kind of traffic those and, make sure that everybody, gets their 2 cents in. And ideally have a good morning session. How's that sound? Very good. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So just to start, I do want to introduce the panel. So they're not just a bunch of people sitting up here that you're staring at, wondering who these people are. I'm going to go ahead and begin with this lady here on my left, Amy Manzo. Amy Manzo is a director of operations with MB2. Amy, would you like to share a little bit about MB2 and maybe just a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure. I think most people know who MB2 is, but we are founded in 2007 by Dr. V. We did get that updated. We are in 45 states. We have 780 locations as of Friday. I help support practices along Phoenix, Nevada, and Oklahoma. So kind of a wide range area. And we are the first DPO, really, and the largest growing DPO currently.
Great. And Amy, how long have you been working with TrueLark now?
She's 18 months. That's right?
About that.
About 18 months?
Yeah. About that. Yeah.
That's about right.
And thank you for being here, Amy.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So we went high tech today, and we're using Zoom to bring in our next speaker, who unfortunately had a travel issue and was unable to make his flight. That being a true partner, he is zoomed in. We have Miles McAllister from SGA, Chief Operating Officer. Welcome, Miles.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear. Yeah.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you. Sorry I can't be there in person. The storms last night hit the South pretty hard. And if anyone is a golf fan, the Players, I live in Jacksonville, Florida, so the Players Championship, you guys probably saw, got delayed and just finished this morning. So my flight got canceled last night out of Jacksonville, Florida. But regardless, I've been the CEO for SGA for about 3.5 years now. We're at about 140 locations, 200 plus dentists. We primarily in about 9 states, so you can think of it as the Southeast. And working with TrueLark for the better part of about 2+ years, and excited to share with you guys, the strengths of it and how we've deployed it.
Great, thank you, Miles. And thank you for making the effort to join us via Zoom. And then lastly, I have my colleague, Tapan Patel. Tapan is head of product. You want to give a quick little introduction on yourself and maybe history with TrueLark?
Yeah, happy to. TrueLark, I've been with TrueLark since 2017, initially as an advisor, and then joined full-time in 2018. Been the head of products and had the success function of the company as well. And excited to be here and excited to be surrounded by folks like Amy and Miles to help share the story around where we started our work with both organizations and where we plan to take it going forward. Thanks for making the time this morning. And thanks for the partners that are here as well. It's exciting to have folks in the rooms. Obviously, delivering a rich experience for patients and practices is key. relies a lot on making sure that we have access to information, data, to deliver as delightful of an experience as possible. Thanks, folks from Dedicon, Overjet, for participating, and look forward to working together with you guys for years to come.
Poppy is a wonderful asset. He keeps me on track. So he's the guardrails on the sales and marketing guy. So yeah, Tom makes a good point. We have kind of a good mix of people in the audience. Raise your hand if you're part of a DPO, ADSO, or multi-location practice. Okay. And then if you are on the other side of the fence, that is a vendor working in tech-based, okay, good. Consultants, any consultants out there? Yeah, good. So I think we have a good mix of people. So certainly after breakfast, make sure to introduce yourself to others in the room. A big part of this is not only hearing what we have to say and hearing our panel, but also interacting with others. So definitely, I think some healthy conversations that we have. Speaking of healthy conversation, we kind of put out what we thought would be a little bit provocative in terms of the name of the breakfast. Will AI eliminate the front desk? Anybody kind of laugh at that or scoff at that? A little bit, yeah, okay. And some people are like, no, I don't know. Well, and it's funny. So, I've been at TrueLark for 6 years, and I've been helping, businesses adopt AI, really with the mission of automation and being more efficient. And I literally had a discussion, I kid you not, 2 days ago with the CEO of the 18 location group. I said, Eric, we're receptionists. We have a kiosk in the front. I want your AI to greet people in a human-like fashion, almost like an avatar that's speaking to them at the kiosk. And I was like, I cannot support that today. That's next week. Okay, hang in there. It's probably coming. But the point being is that more and more people are thinking creatively in regard to their AI strategy and how they can use AI. They're thinking outside the box and maybe some of what I'm going to consider traditional use cases and letting their imagination roam free. Now, of course, some people kind of go to one extreme and they expect AI to do everything, which isn't necessarily the case. And then other people kind of have a more narrow view of AI, like, okay, what can it do? Can it do anything? And so I think today should be pretty, enlightening in terms of, how it really is having an impact on businesses and not only on the business, maybe, on EBITDA and things like that, but also, how's it impacting the patient experience? How's it impacting operations? So ideally we'll get a 360 view from our panel. The other thing before we get in to the panel discussions, I thought, maybe I would reflect a little bit on a presentation that I made at, oh gosh, way back in June of last year at ADSO. Anybody go to the ADSO breakfast in Denver that we held? Maybe, okay, a few people. Minus. Thank you for your loyalty. I don't have any loyalty points yet. I'm out of the program for that. And then Dykema. In back at that time, the gist of the presentation specifically was around AI built, purpose built, right? Because you've had the rise of ChatGPT and tools out there where you have a lot of people popping up in the space that are just kind of latching on to large language model and trying to put some guardrails around it. And I made a point by having a AI created image that was the intro to my presentation that was haywire, right? Because it wasn't really purpose built for my needs. And it just displayed how, if you aren't careful and, really thoughtful about your use of AI, you can kind of go off the rails. TrueLark, thank goodness, has always erred on accuracy. And that gets into a lot of things that maybe we'll share today around our approach to AI. But at that time, it was really around AI models that were able to take goal-driven conversations and act on those and bring them to the rightful outcome. Where we're at today, we'll just kind of set the table. What we're thinking and where the technology is at is more along the lines of agentic AI. And so if you haven't heard that term, not to be too buzzwordy, You're gonna hear it more and more, and really, the idea behind that, if you think about like, I don't know, we all, probably most everybody here drives a car. If you think about agentic AI in maybe like a self-driving car, really you just want to get in the car and you want to tell it to get from point A to point B. The kind of the agentic part of it is that car being able to switch lanes when it needs to, slow down when it needs to, not run into anybody, exit when it needs to, really to execute on getting from point A to point B. You're telling the car, I want to go from here to here. Let's make it happen, right? And with agentic AI as it relates to dental, that's where TrueLark is pushing the envelope. And what I mean by that is traditionally we might think of a lot of the AI use cases out there being triggered by the patient. And that might be, the traditional one is like a missed call. Nowadays, there's a lot of people out there handling a missed call use case where, they're calling in and maybe it's voice or text responding to that, which is good and fine. We've been doing that for many, many years. But where we're at right now is having, a platform that really is an AI control center, if you will. And it doesn't matter if the trigger is coming from staff, the patient, or even a third-party decision support platform like an Overjet, right? And being able to leverage, the interconnectivity that keeps getting better and better between these systems, to have, something that says, hey, we have a cohort of patients out there that have not converted into the treatment plans. They fall out of it. Okay, let's have AI go out, identify these people and get them back into those treatment plans. Whether that is, using information from the PMS, information from the third party, and of course, information, that is native to the AI platform itself. So in that regard, it's a pretty exciting time. As well as, those, kind of evolved use cases. You have, the ability to, at least in the TrueLark architecture, really kind of have 1,000 configurations in the box, right? And so where some of the point solutions are very narrow in terms of what they can do and understand and be configured to, we're at a point where we can really take all the uniqueness of every practice out there and accommodate that, to execute on these use cases. Because who has a group of practices that are all the same? Everything is the same, people are the same. Okay, all right. I love that. You're probably one of my easier clients to work with. But the reality is a lot of them, that's not the case, right? Amy, would you say that's the case with MD2?
Every practice is different.
Yeah, every practice is different. Yeah, and how many do you have?
37.
Yeah, right.
Oh, well, we have
No,
780.
Yeah.
780. Every single one is different. There are no two that are like, unless it's one owner with 2 or 3 locations.
Right. So anyway, one thing I always like to do is get a little thought going. In the morning, I like to do a little math. I'm sure all of you do, right? And so just kind of bring ourselves back to some of the problems that have existed, whether AI is here or not. So a little quiz here. So 55%. Okay. If you, Demise, no cheating, because I think maybe you've seen this before. So something is happening 55% of the time at your DPO or DSO. Any guesses?
Missed calls.
Calls being answered, missed calls. Okay, good. Something around calls. What else?
Dental assistant on their phone.
That actually is 65%. Yeah.
What is retention?
Yeah, no, okay, yeah, retention, okay. So missed calls during business hours, right? So of your cohort of calls that you're missing, 55% of them happen during business hours. So if you're missing 100 calls, 55 of them will actually happen during business hours. Now I think people are kind of wrapping their head around this. Years ago, when I talked about this, people say, oh, we don't miss calls. Right. The reality is that things do fall through the cracks. It is a issue, and that's one of the problems. 65%. This is the people on their phone.
Unreturned calls.
Okay. Any other guess? What's that?
Basic.
Case acceptance? Oh, I wish, right? That sounds pretty good. Who has 65% or higher case acceptance? Who has 40% or lower case acceptance? Okay, we'll see. We'll see who's. Maybe afterwards, people come up and, yeah, case acceptance. That is actually leads coming in after hours, right? So the majority of your leads will come in when you are not there. Right, so again, things fall through the cracks. 4%.
The time stats are right.
Okay. Right. Depends on who's presenting the stats, right?
Callbacks actually happen.
Callbacks actually happen, okay. Good guess. Yeah, a lot of people don't necessarily know, right?
Lead conversion.
Lead conversion, yeah. This is actually increasing labor costs. Yeah, so labor costs have gone up. I'm sure everybody in this room feels that, right? So these are kind of some of the standard problems that have been present in the industry. The question is, what are you going to do about it, right? You know, so kind of prior to the AI era, you might hire more people, but labor costs are going up. You know, hiring and staffing and training and retaining has been very difficult. We all know that, especially, you know, coming through the COVID era. The other thing would be to maybe outsource to a third-party call center. But really you're just kind of, you know, taking a labor problem in-house and maybe exporting it out-house. And then, you know, anybody here run a call center? A few people, easy to do, right? Yeah. So that's kind of a tricky one as well. So yeah, so definitely there are some problems out there. Our approach has been to use AI across multiple channels to automate these transactions and really try to buy back time for staff so that they can use time for a higher value activity. But enough about me and kind of my perspective on it. I'd like to start talking with our panel here. And what I'm gonna do is just kind of open up. And Miles, I'm gonna try and make you bigger up here. Let me see if I can do that. Did I? Okay.
There you go.
There we go. Miles, you can't see it, but you now have much better presence in the room here.
All right.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe I'll start with Amy. You know, kind of what were, maybe share kind of the initial strategy that MB2 had in using AI initially, and has that evolved since you've had it in place?
Yeah, absolutely. Initially, what triggered was the missed calls, right? Like getting somebody to answer the phones. Today, TrueLark has an extremely high success rate. And not only missed calls, but everything from booking online to, do you want me to go into confirmation calls?
Sure. Yeah.
I'm piloting confirmation AI calls. We have huge success in that. And so it has evolved in the last 18 months that I've worked with TrueLark. It ultimately makes the practice more effective, and your team more effective, because it's taking something off that one we know doesn't get done often, or is the last thing on the list to get done. And the weekends and evenings, when your practices close at 5 o'clock, the average working person is calling after 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock to make their appointments. And so if we don't provide an opportunity for the patients to book with us, or even booking appointments online, then they're going to find something else that is more convenient for them. And so I would say that it's evolved in terms of what the growth is incredible in the last 18 months from what I started working with. And it's made a huge impact in every practice that has it.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
You know, I have a follow-up question, but I'm gonna surface that same question to Miles. Miles, tell us a little bit about, you know, from the beginning of implementing AI and to where you're at today. You know, how have you thought about it from the initial stages and what your strategy was then, and how's that evolved to today?
Yeah, I think about 2 years ago, it really did start with, again, the unanswered call rate and leaving no patient behind sort of mantra, however you want to say it. And our thought was we want some sort of medium to connect with the patient when we can't pick up the phone. And at first we were looking for some sort of text that just said, hey, we're aware of your call. We'll get in touch with you. We'll get back with you. And then we really started looking at the industry and saying, what is out there? Stumbled upon TrueLark, and then realized very quickly that TrueLark could not only engage the patient via text, but also then could schedule the patient via text. And so that became sort of like, all right, we're onto something here. And we started with 6 offices. We were skeptics of it, just like I'm sure multiple people have been of AI, especially 2 years ago. Really, I think the acceptance of AI is really coming to the forefront the past 6 months, maybe the past year. But 2 years ago, 2+ years ago, there was a lot more skepticism around it. And so we started with 6, moved to 8, by 12, 12 offices, 20, now we're full scale, and really sort of took our time and did the analysis on it. I mean, we looked at from the amount of bookings per office, the amount of revenue generated, what was the broken appointment rate via TrueLark versus normal sort of conventional ways, which is the phone or in the office, and really didn't notice any considerable differences with it, and said, hey, this is complete upside at this point. Because ultimately those patients aren't gonna, sure, you could say they're gonna call back, but it's an unknown. And the other thing that I think everyone in the audience probably is understanding is, the macroeconomic factors right now that are affecting just the overall society and healthcare in particular, and dentistry in particular, is there is to some degree a slowing of new patient volume, right? At least post-COVID, right? You had this huge backlog of patients that just came, and it was an explosion, right? And I think we're more in a steady state now. Probably took us about 23, 24 to really get into a steady state and sort of normalize where the new patient volume is. And about 42% of all your incoming calls, at least for FGA, are new patient opportunities. So that means that every call coming in, only less than half are new patient opportunities, and that's a lifeline to an office, which means you have to convert and engage those patients even more. It's not like 100% of the calls are coming in. The other thing, though, that you have to realize is those other calls, let's call it those other 58% calls, what are those calls that are consuming the front office time? From insurance verification to confirmations to reschedule to cancellations to, hey, what's the office address and how do I get there? You can automate all of that. And you're able to really reduce the inefficient call time and really prioritize, the phone, which I think is outbound for the office, which is active recall, and really, that insurance verification, which probably the RCM AI now is probably about 80%. They probably get right. So you're still talking about 20% of the offices are still having to deal with insurance verification. I don't know if it'll ever get to 100%. So really, you're maximizing the time on the phone for the front office while also limiting those inefficient sort of calls, and then prioritizing, right, the 42% of new patient calls coming in. You need to convert, you need to answer them. And if you don't, right, TrueLark is sort of a gatekeeper to make sure that no patient's left behind. So that's how we viewed it. Again, it started with a lot of skepticism. So anyone in the office who was a skeptic, right? We were too, and there was a lot of back and forth with TrueLark, a lot of give and takes and push and prods. And quite honestly, I probably did a lot of quality assurance over, 1,200 patient texts that I would read and make sure that there wasn't something going on, and I would give feedback in the system itself, then usually call top end or Eric and give them live feedback to saying, hey, this needs to be tweaked or this needs to be changed. And ultimately we got into a really good product and a really good flow with our patients. So yeah, hopefully that answers, Eric, what you're looking for.
Yeah, thanks, Miles. So the takeaway, so one of the things that I've seen not only shift with SGA, that over time, people were like, you got to get to every call, right? We got to find a way to, accommodate that. We ideally love staff to do that first. AI is kind of backup. But now more and more, what I'm hearing is what you pointed out there is that the highest and best use of staff time is not to get tangled up in these transactional conversations that are around, rescheduling, things like that. And so now I'm hearing, I don't want my people on, those types of calls. I don't want to throw a head count at those types of calls.
Yeah, they're low risk environment, right? Giving a patient directions is a low risk environment that can be automated. Again, anything that you can automate that is low risk, you need to be doing it. And again, I think Amy nailed it. Give me a solution that's after hours or on weekends or on Fridays. And, I would love to hear it, right? What I've heard is, well, you can have an on-call person. Well, eventually you're gonna have to pay that person on-call pay, right? And that is, that's another facet which Eric talked about, which is the rising costs, right? And ultimately, you got to look for ways to sort of get margin expansion, which I think the dental industry has not done well over the past 20 years, right? There's been really margin degradation, and that game has completely changed. I think you need to start focusing on how do I get margin expansion, and then how do I offset the cost of the clinical compensation that is continuously going to go up. Yeah, it might stabilize, but to some degree, it's going to continue to go up.
Thank you for that, Miles. So I want to, so we talked about missed opportunities coming in. We talked about what Miles pointed out, the kind of new dynamic around new patient volume as it relates to kind of macro things that are happening out there in the world. And maybe you can share what we have seen over the years in terms of typical volumes coming in across a practice in regards to maybe total patient inquiries across multiple channels, and perhaps that breakdown of new and existing, and your thoughts and perspective on that.
Yeah, I'd say that, ultimately, and this is probably true for both for ME2 and for SJ, but broadly speaking, there's three kind of inbound channels that are relevant for DSOs. There's the missed call channel, which ends up being probably about 40 to 50% of the conversation volume that goes to the platform. There's online booking, which is maybe another 30% or so, and then there's web chat traffic, which is about 20%. There are some differences in where what the splits are between new or existing patients across those different channels, but ultimately we end up seeing new patients engaging on every one of those channels. And ultimately, the reason why you have all these different channels is that patients have different preferences around how they interact, depending on time of day, depending on, ultimately what tools they have access to, whether they have a phone in front of them or if they're just looking in a meeting to schedule something. And so the important thing to do is to enable all different modes of communication and allow for the patient to have that preference, whether it's after hours, during hours, on the weekends, before work, during work, so on and so forth. And over time, what we actually see is that there's a stabilization of conversation volume across practices. And what I mean by that is, sometimes our practices or the DSO corporate entity will say, what, I think enabling these sorts of tools has actually made my staff lazier. They're letting more calls go to voicemail, and that's, I think, what ends up bearing out the data is that that's not really true, right? There's a pretty stable volume of conversations, whether it's right at the start of using TrueLark, and the thought is, okay, once the practice gets comfortable with having this automation tool in place and they verify that it's doing it correctly, they'll start letting more and more things go to voicemail. Doesn't really bear out in the data. It's pretty stable, whether it's at the start of the experience versus the middle of the experience and present day. Where you can start to play around with and get more conversation volume and automation is probably is the point at which you start to actually introduce AI as an option up front, right? So when you're calling into the practice, let's have it be an option on the IVR system, right? If you're a new patient, dial X to book your appointment online. So I think yes, there are you know, there are existing channels that practices start with that allow you to take care of a lot of these opportunities. And the volumes can be stable across all these different channels, but once you start to get comfortable, you can actually start to, take advantage of this automation that you have in place now. And like Miles kind of alluding to, ultimately, is there a way to get another 20% lift on automation by presenting options that are self-serve up front to drive the level of automation that we can do in practice?
Thanks, Stephen. So Amy, I want to bring it back to you. So for those in the room that do not know this, Amy has a certain amount of fame because there's a term that has been coined, the Amy Manzo way. It's not a bad thing, it's actually a very good thing. So what I want to ask you about is when the rubber meets the road and you implement AI, what are some of the things that you've learned, or what are some of the best practices that you encourage out of a practice when adopting AI? Because there's a lot of things that go into it, right? It's AI is new, and for some people that's scary. It's part of the tech stack, and some people aren't technical. And ultimately, it's about change management. So tell us maybe you can share some of the best practices to implement AI and maybe describe what the Amy Manzo way is.
Sure, absolutely.
If there's nothing proprietary that.
No, there's not. So I think, back to Topin's point, like you have all these platforms, and so making sure that you roll those out, so your staff gets comfortable is key. I do think that you want to utilize everything. You don't really want to piecemeal it, because then you're losing something along the way. Patients need convenience. That is ultimately the key. And we have to see patients within a time limit, right? So if I'm calling for a new patient and you can't see me for 3 weeks, I'm out. I'm going somewhere else. And so utilizing the program allows you to get really creative in your PMS, and it reads your PMS. And so if I have, and this is just kind of a side off, but if I have a person at the front desk who doesn't want to stay past 5 and a new patient calls for 4 o'clock, are the chances are they're going to book that 4 o'clock? They're probably not, right? So giving the patient the autonomy to make their appointments and setting up a pre or best practice schedule really works well, because you're going to grow your new patient stats faster, right? You're not letting somebody at the front desk dictate when you're going to take those appointments, but yet you're working with the doctor, the manager, and you're setting these parameters through TrueLark, and then that kind of takes over. Well, in my practices, I typically see an average of about 37% of our new patients booked through TrueLark. So that is giving the time that works for them. So with that being said, I think the biggest thing you have to look at is what works for each practice, but also what works for the patient. In terms of the Amy Manzo way, I just kind of was the first one to use TrueLark and ADSO. I think that, again, we have to go back and get those patients in. And so I create a phantom column that TrueLark reads. That phantom column has prime times for new patients and emergencies and all appointments. So TrueLark is booking multiple different appointments based on our practices, so they can even book treatment appointments. This isn't just new patient and exams. In the beginning, I work with a practice, I'm not going to do that. We're just going to book like consults, new patient cleanings, and exams until that team gets really comfortable with the use of it, and then you can expand on that. But the reality is that every practice has what, a 15% no-show rate, at least on average, right? Or the day before cancellation. So that phantom column is overbooking the practice based on their no-show rate. Does that make sense? So we're, at the end of the day, we're not losing anything. We're actually finishing just where we should. And that is this Amy Manzo way that is a really hard mindset to sometimes get over, the doctors and the managers. But once I can show them the data and prove to them that this really is going to benefit their practice, they'll do that. My rule of thumb is a new patient needs to be seen within 3 days. If you can get a new patient in, they're going to go somewhere. And we have some offices that can see you today, right? They don't have their chairs filled. And we have some offices that really don't have room for more patients. So now you've got to get creative. How are you going to do that? How are you going to build that? Because eventually that practice will not succeed if they don't have a new patient flow. And so again, that gets back to creative with the phantom column or scheduling. Well, I think that answered the question in a whole, does it not?
Yeah, I think so. Were there any impacts on staff that surprised you? Or
Oh,
operations?
yeah. Staff thinks that AI is gonna take over their jobs. It happens. I'm gonna lose my job. I don't want it. Here's the thing. It is only gonna benefit our practice. It is only gonna help reduce the load that they have. It's only gonna actually make them more efficient as well. So things like you have, just say a front desk of 3, and you've got 1 or 2 out sick. Now you've got 1 person up there and they're responsible for all the patients, right? Plus the phones. That's not going to happen. So don't panic. You have TrueLark. They can handle that. The other thing is, one of my biggest pet peeves in a practice is when I see a patient or a treatment coordinator trying to close a case, and then they just rush the patient out because of phone. They've got phones to answer and they have insurance verification to do, right? So, hey, we'll just email that to you. We'll email your treatment plan. You've just lost that patient. So patient communication in front of you is vital. And let TrueLark and other AI things take over the things that they can, so that you're not cutting your patient short in front of you. And I think that has, for once I get practices on board, that has probably been the biggest changer for them, is having to know that they're not stressed if they don't get that call, that they're focusing on the patient in front of them. And that goes back to, you know, how it used to be years ago, right? When everything wasn't so crazy in the dentistry world, and patients' acceptance rate were way higher back then than they are today. And that's because we've lost that connection with the patient.
Is there kind of an aha moment that you see?
Yeah, there is. And sometimes I still have a doctor, just like, I don't know. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to put you in contact with this doctor, and you guys, let's have a conversation so you can see how it's working in that practice. I have one specific practice that has struggled in new patients extremely. And they were my first practice I brought TrueLark to. And the doctor said, I'll do anything you have that can help me. He is now obviously no longer struggling, and was one of our fastest growing practices last year. And a practice has been around 25 years, just a new owner. So it's important that you look at all options, and it really can be beneficial in any kind of practice and adjust. It is totally customizable.
You mentioned something that years ago I wasn't thinking about it. I was just thinking about automation and, you know, what can we do to take these transactional activities off the plate of the front desk and things that are falling through the cracks. And somebody stood at an event and they started talking about staff retention, because the reduction in stress that you were mentioning about, okay, I have this person in front of me, the phone's ringing, what do I do? Right?
Yes.
And they had this dissonance in the brain, and they said, yeah, we've actually had a higher retention rate. And I said, oh, okay, that's really interesting. That surprised me at that time.
Yeah, staff and
That makes
patient.
sense, right?
Mhm.
How about you, Miles?
It's like we had a question in mind.
Oh, yeah, question.
I apologize for my naivete. What interface are we talking about? Robo voice, send them a text and they complete, like, we're talking specifically about scheduling, 37% of your.
Yeah. Through TrueLark, so it's a multitude of all the platforms, so whether they're going onto your website and booking themselves. They're calling the practice after hours and TrueLark is taking over, or a
Over text.
over
That's what I'm
text,
saying, we just
sorry,
take it over. That's
yeah,
what I'm-
over text,
Okay, so
via text,
they're calling in on mobile phone and sending a text and then not leave the transaction, they call back.
that's correct, yes, yes.
Okay.
And then, of course, the online, has a pretty big presence as well, the online booking.
Gotcha, but it's not yet a voice agent, like, hey, I wanna come in Tuesday at 4 o'clock, it's not quite there yet.
Yeah, I'll let Toppin speak to voice and use of voice, and I kind of took an act in this presentation of not just giving a commercial on TrueLark and a demo on TrueLark. And I realize some of the audience may or may not be as familiar with the platform. And so after this breakfast, we're gonna have this room, we do have a booth, and if you want to come by and see an in-depth demonstration of the platform, more than happy to do that. But in general, our approach to the problem has always been to be a multi-channel, use case. And so we want to meet the patient at the various intersections that they're coming to the practice at from an inbound perspective. And then also we've expanded use cases to the outbound. So today that's predominantly all handled over chat and SMS. We do have voice like a Siri, Alexa, voice AI capability that we've been judiciously putting out there in certain use cases. Amy mentioned one in terms of patient reminders. We've been in this since 2017, 18, and our founders have PhDs in machine learning, and all that to be said is that we've been very careful in how we deploy these newer parts of the AI landscape or AI offering, because we want to err on the side of being correct, not just kind of shiny and that looks exciting. But yeah, we can get into that a little bit more. I'm sorry.
So what happens if a patient calls in on a landline?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if they call on a landline, it'll just be status quo for people that call on a landline. They'll be presented with a voicemail greeting, and they can leave a voicemail that will notify staff and people call them back. Generally, in that greeting, it will say something to the effect of, hey, whether in the greeting or the IVR, that there are options out there to use an automated system. And so the next time they may want to call in on a mobile phone and take advantage of that. But yeah, it's a great question. Miles, getting back to you, I was going to ask you kind of the same question. How, what has been the impact in reception at the actual locations in regard to AI deployment, and has it been disruptive in the operating model? Has it been accepted? What were some of the learnings that your group has had?
Yeah, I think there's a phase rollout where there's hesitation and skepticism and concern about losing your job, to acceptance to I can't live without it, is really what we've kind of seen over the past 2+ years. But again, it starts with explaining the why. You got to start there. Doctors respond to data. And I think if you're able to say, listen, you have an unanswered call rate of greater than 50%, and when you do pick up the phone, you're converting at less than 50%, you're not good at it already. So we need a solution, and that's where TrueLark comes in, right? And, the other thing that I'm sure everyone can relate to is the churn rate. The front office is an entry-level position that everyone in the country is fighting for, from Chick-fil-A to Walmart to other healthcare settings. Everyone is fighting for that entry-level position, and they're usually non-licensed to some degree. Their education level can vary, and the only way you're going to be able to do that is to sort of have some sort of AI automation in there that allows you that peace of mind to do it. Plus, just think about just when someone's sick or you're short-staffed or whatever, you have the peace of mind to know that, like, hey, when an inbound patient is called and we miss it, they're going to be engaged by TrueLark. That's huge, right? So again, I think the aha moment for us was on July 4th. We booked 50 patients on July 4th. And, that kind of sells itself right there. So you just look at, the holidays and on the weekends and stuff like that, and it should be able to sell itself. But again, when you're talking about adopting AI, you also have to relate it to the team. How's it going to make your life easier? You have to provide training. You can't stress them out about it. And ultimately, you have to also tie it back to, hey, this can help you with some sort of, if you have a production bonus or you have some sort of goal for the office or there's something there, this is going to help you achieve that, right? And I think, again, right, there seems to be alignment when you start speaking about how it impacts them and how it impacts the overall office. So I would just, those are the big things you gotta have in mind. And then again, Amy nailed it. It's a crawl, walk, run type of mentality. Start out with hygiene appointments, new patient, low threat, get them in the door, and then you can kind of scale up TrueLark as needed. I will also just say, like, one of the big skepticisms we had was capacity. So yes, in theory, it's great to have a goal of, same day or within, 4 or 5 days. But the reality of it is it's very difficult, especially if you have a great dentist. There's a high demand from the patients that want to come in. So we were really skeptic about turning on TrueLark, especially for PPO offices that have, patient choice is limited to some degree, right? Not every office is accepting insurance, so they're limited in the offices they can go to. So your days of schedule is going to be always higher, usually in a PPO office to some degree, right? I mean, obviously, again, you're trying to reduce your days of schedule, but we were really skeptical about turning on in PPO office where we had high days of schedule. But we did eventually, and what we found out was it was a positive, right? Patients, because they just weren't answering the phone because there were so many dang inbound calls to the PPO offices, that once we turned it on, it just increased the volume. Even with theoretically a 13, 14, 15 plus days to schedule, the patient still wanted to be able to schedule it again because they just had limited choices and where their insurance was being accepted. So I would just, again, for 2+ years, we, poked and prodded TrueLark in every way. We were, tried it out. We really tested it and just found, a positive, overall net positive for the product. So again, I would just, if you have any questions, reach out to me and I can walk you through it. But it's been a huge advantage for us.
Well, as you mentioned, the competition for staff out there, not only within healthcare, but just the general labor landscape. Have you guys changed in regard to the type of person that you're looking for, the job description, the training, or is it the same?
To some degree, yes and no. I mean, obviously, the ideal world is you want someone who's a little bit more tech savvy, who's a little bit more comfortable with that. The other thing I would say is you start to go into more of a, someone with retail experience or sales experience to some degree, right? Where they're able to manage sort of difficult conversations or be able to flex. But overall, no, it really hasn't changed, right? You're still looking for someone who's got, authentic, charismatic, right? Able to be able to handle conversations well. But I don't think it's changed the dynamic, except, right, if you find someone who's tech savvy, that helps. But again, I would say most people nowadays, including my parents who are 80+ years old, right, are pretty tech savvy and have iPhones, right? So I think the days of thinking, older generations are not tech savvy, I think those days have passed.
How about you, Amy? Any thoughts on that?
I 100% agree, Miles. I have a practice that is in a retirement area and has the highest engagement in TrueLark response. And it is in a 55+ entire area. And we were chatting last night, even to the degree where sometimes somebody texts back and say, apologize for being slow to respond, So I do think when it comes to tech, we are in a world where everybody knows how to send a text and do some form of online communication.
Miles, this was Reedsville. Out in rural Georgia.
Oh, you're talking the actual the chat? Is that what you're talking? Yeah. So early on, again, I was reading all these text threads, and Reedsville, which is a pretty, you know, kind of like a secondary sort of tertiary market, if you will, right? Maybe about an hour outside of Savannah, right? For those who are familiar with sort of that area. The patient was literally apologizing to the person profusely about, you know, I'm sorry, I'm slowly texting, and almost complimenting the AI. And it was a little comical, but also like a wake up call for us to be like, wow, this really has no impact. Like, people can't really tell. To some degree, maybe they kind of know, but like, you know, again, it was, and I think it was a 75+ year old lady. I mean, it was an older lady.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks for sharing. So I want to get in to a little bit of the things that are coming down the pipe and have Toppin speak to that. But before we transition, I just want to see if there's any kind of comments, questions in the audience. Yep.
Hi, I'm Toby, founder CEO of Dental Find. So in terms of the online booking component you guys touched on regarding the question around functionality and like what is TrueLark actually and how does it work? So I know we've like emphasized a lot of the texting components and like, okay, if it's after hours, can you guys speak on, you guys and like Miles and Amy, the online booking component, and is it that maybe once they text after hours, the link is to the online booking, or like how does that part work? Or, you know, also Eric, feel free to later.
Yeah, I can take that.
Okay.
So ultimately, you know, and when we use the term online booking, it's ultimately any sort of third party that's booking something that's not the staff. So that could be, you know, ultimately what you want to do is define a way in which a third party solution can access your schedule, can read availability, can determine who, you know, which providers are bookable for which services. And TrueLark then exposes that same logic to whether it's a text-based interaction where the patient has just received a text after a missed call. They can go back and forth, you know, ask for, hey, I'm looking for an emergency appointment for my child. And the AI will understand that, and then it could go ahead and offer availability in text. So now it's not just, you know, sending out a link to some sort of online booking experience on a website. It's actually engaging the patient over text. But TrueLark then does allow for that same logic that we've defined for the practice during onboarding to then allow you to put a widget on your website to kind of give that online booking experience that's on a web page.
Okay, so when you guys are saying online booking, you're really just talking about texting dialogue,
That's
not necessarily a third party link.
No, it's a TrueLark hosted link that's allowing you to access the schedule of the book, whether it's through your website or through a web chat or through a missed call text.
Okay, so it sounds like it's both.
It is.
Yeah, it is.
Okay,
both.
it is.
Yeah, well, it's not third party in the sense that it's not, you know, it's a TrueLark solution that's allowing you to access availability and schedule.
So this happens to be an MD2 location that uses the platform, and you know, right off the bat, when I look at this, I can see multiple intersections of the AI and the patient potentially. So as we mentioned, you could click on this schedule appointment. That's going to open online booking. That can also be surfaced as, you know, a possibility in a conversation, even though the conversations that can be triggered via missed call, a direct text, and or a chat down here all have the same AI model around it, right? And so at the end of the day, basically, it's going to ask, you know, how may we help you? And it's going to drive that conversation depending on what the patient is expressing. I have tooth pain, I need to come into emergency. In that case, it's going to start kind of quantifying what level of pain and what the emergency is about, but then pull real-time availability from the practice management system. And so at the end of the day, the automation that we're driving isn't a glorified notification system. It's actually doing things in the PMS. So if you're booking into an emergency appointment, it's booking into the PMS. If you're rescheduling, if you're canceling, things like that are being affected directly into the practice management system. And so, you know, where AI got started with TrueLark years ago was really on a lot of these inbound use cases. Now we've expanded that to accommodate a lot more outbound use cases. So in the case of appointment reminders and also unconverted treatment plans, and maybe that's a good segue top into, you know, Amy mentioned voice earlier. Maybe you can kind of get a peek behind the curtain in terms of some of the things that we have coming down the pipe and you know, kind of taking a leap off of what I was talking about before in regard to agentic AI.
Sure. So I think there was a question from the audience as to whether TrueLark does, you know, voice-based interactions as well. And so we did start off using SMS as the channel communication, but since then we've extended the AI to do voice-based interactions as well. So we're in beta for our first voice-based solution that allows you to reach out proactively to patients who perhaps got a couple text messages to get reminded about an appointment but didn't engage. TrueLark's voice-based solution will then reach out via voice, will place a call on the patient and essentially share the same message and allow the patient to confirm, ask for a reschedule, answer questions before coming into the appointment. And at TrueLark, we don't see voice as being kind of a standalone feature where, you know, you're simply just engaging over a voice-based interaction. We see it as a kind of an ingredient in the broader, you know, patient communication platform that allows you to use SMS when most relevant, use voice when most relevant, and ultimately just provide optionality as well. And so, and what's neat is that the same sort of setup that you did, if you will, to set up the SMS-based interactions, whether it's, you know, connecting to your PMS, connecting to some other data source, all that same configuration would then be made available to a voice-based interaction as well. Today, we've started off with a relatively narrow use case for voice, which is reaching out to a patient who hasn't engaged over text to confirm their appointment. But we will, over time, over the next 2 quarters, start handling more sophisticated use cases like scheduling. You know, asking the patient why they're coming in, what they're booking, you know, ensure the right appointment type is being selected, offer availability, and so on and so forth. So existing patient bookings will be kind of the next sort of use case that we'll support over voice. Then we'll do new patient scheduling over voice as well, and then all the FAQs and whatnot that TrueLark can already support over SMS will be supported over a voice-based interaction as well. The reason, you know, the reason why we are being a bit more methodical about launching a voice-based solution is ultimately you're entrusting TrueLark to be in that, you know, that point between the practice and the patient. You know, it's a sacred sort of interaction. You don't want to get it wrong, right? The last thing you want to do is deliver inaccurate information or just an experience that doesn't end up handling what the AI was hoping to handle. And so we're being very intentional. We're making sure that the voice-based interactions are effective, and so that's why we started off with a kind of a very, you know, straightforward use case. We'll launch in subsequent use cases after that. Go for it.
So I just had a question. Let's say a new patient calls, we missed the call, they get a text.
Yep.
And they were like, well, I called to see if you guys take my insurance. This is a fee for service practice. Is TrueLark AI answering this question?
So you can configure, you know, the in-network providers that you have. You can configure, you know, standard responses that you want.
I'm talking about like nuanced, like we are not in network.
There's multiple ways to handle it. So again, this was a big discussion point that we had originally with TrueLark. And there's 2 thoughts. It depends on how you want to handle it. Do you want to get the patient in and let the front office handle it? Being like, hey, you know, well, we accept it, we'll file it on your behalf, right? Or is it, hey, no, we're out of network, right? And you don't want to deal with it, right? And we tried both sort of channels, if you will, of doing it with, you know, again, it's really just a different flavor of how you want to handle it. You can customize though TrueLark to do what you want, right? So again, it's really up to you to design that and how you want to handle it. You can come up with a scripted response, right? Which again, probably it's a better response than most of the front office is going to do anyway, because they seem to fumble up when that question comes up. Let's just be honest about it, because they're uncomfortable answering it. TrueLark, to some degree, does a better job with it.
Got it. Well, that's helpful.
Agreed.
And follow-up was like pricing, like if someone's like, hey, how much do you charge for liners?
Yeah, TrueLark doesn't handle pricing related information. What it'll do is it'll gracefully say, hey, it'd be best for you to, you know, come in for your appointment, get an evaluation so that the practice can give you a better sense of what that is. So it won't quote anything, so that you leave that more nuanced interaction for the practice when they come in.
You guys are more patient conversion and retention as opposed to like acquisition and sort of like the lead gen aspect. correct?
Yes, TrueLark doesn't do marketing, if you will, to kind of generate the lead. But the moment at which the lead is ready to interact with your practice, whether it's, on your website or on the phone or in response to some sort of ad.
But so let me just double down on that. So before you spend $10,000 a month on marketing, you better make sure you can answer the phone call, right? And,
Yeah.
and the thing I would say, if you don't know what your unanswered call rate is and what your conversion rate is, then marketing should be the last thing you do, right? You need that data point, which I'm sure everyone's shaking their heads on. But I'm going to say, if you're going to drop, a significant amount of marketing, especially in those really competitive sort of cities, if you will, having TrueLark as a stopgap just makes sense to me, right? Just try it. Because if you're going to spend that money, then you might as well have something that's going to engage. Because what happens is all of a sudden you go from 20 calls a month to 100, and you still have one person there, you haven't staffed up. You're going to need TrueLark to be able to answer those phone calls. So again, I would just question marketing spend without, sort of like a safety net in place. And that was another thing we looked at, was like, hey, before we do this, we got to have some way to be able to handle the inbound calls if we spend that much amount of money.
That's right. These are people that already are a result of marketing that you already did, that you're not taking care of. So,
You want to speak to leading edge call?
it looks like Tomas had a.
Yeah, it must.
Can you make the voice sound like Beyonce? No,
That's not true.
No, that's a good idea, because like today, for example, wouldn't it be cool if you got a reminder from someone with a heavy Irish accent? Hey, top of the morning, happy St. Patrick's Day, whatever. Or maybe Elvis is your front desk person, I don't know. That'd be fun to have.
This is my visionary, I get this all the time, I literally have a list of. IVR, so do you have data? And this would be interesting for Amy or Miles, but if you guys are, in your IVR, is TrueLark a prompt? And if it is a prompt, how often are callers using it? And if they're not using it, I don't know, topic, if you guys have data on.
So the default setup sends all missed calls to TrueLark.
Yes.
That's where our processes get started. But you can configure it to have TrueLark be an IVR option as well.
Yep.
We see about 20 to 25% of patients selecting that option as well. It allows you to essentially then just increase the level of automation once you're comfortable with how the AI handles things. But yes, short answer is yes, you can do that. And it's about 20-30% of patients will select that option upfront. Miles, you had a comment there.
No, I was going to say that, yeah, I agree with what you just said. So, yep.
I'm curious, as you push for more adoption, is there specific KPI thresholds? I can't remember, one of you said the doctors respond to data, and we have a strong autonomy model where we have to kind of show them the ROI before. When you talk about missed calls or whatever it is, what's your threshold where you see it's an easier conversation versus you're twisting somebody's arm?
It depends on the.
You said like 30-ish locations at MB2?
We have 42.
45, something like that.
That has
correct?
adopted it. Again, I think it depends on, that conversation's different with every practice, right, or with every owner. But I think if you pull the average data or something that's a similar practice to their size and share that with them, it's really a no-brainer, right? Like,
I would also add that if you wouldn't mind, ROI is never the problem. It's literally never the problem. It's like, I've yet to come across a dental practice on TrueLark that doesn't see enough ROI for it to make sense.
yes.
It's always change management, if anything, right? It's like, because statistically speaking, TrueLark books about 24, 25 appointments for the median practice, and the standard deviation is pretty low. So it's net, and I don't know, 70-80% of them show up, and most of it goes to the bottom line. So ROI is never the issue. It's does the practice want to do something that's slightly different than what they've done before? That allows us them to see value.
Agreed.
And I guess, can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah,
The follow-up question would be for like MB2's priority, do you focus on like the bottom quartile and then you start specific KPI sheet where you're like, hey, this is where we wanna start? I don't know, like as you've thought about rolling it out, does that make sense? Like,
yes, I think it's individual, again, back to every practice and what that particular practice needs. And I think part of it is just like you being here to listen. You know, we give our doctors full autonomy, so we can't tell them they have to use it. But the more and more they hear about it and the more and more they gauge, the more and more of them are saying, hey, I want that in my practice. I almost feel like, you know, stop by and demo, because I think the demo helps to kind of put it all together. But another, going back to stats or the KPIs, and Miles, I don't know if you have seen this, but one of the things that I have seen is the patients that are booking, new patients specifically, that are booking through a form of AI with TrueLark are actually spending 3 times more in the practice than the average new patient. And that typically comes from the capture of the patient that you're getting. So part of it is the convenience, right? So I'm calling you at 5:30 because I just got done with work and you're handling it, taking care of me. Well, when I come in, I'm gonna be the patient that needs to get done everything I need to, right then. Same day treatment is hired. The other thing back to Miles talked about is that 4th of July. I too, the day after a Monday holiday, that Tuesday is probably the most successful days that we see in TrueLark. It's also the highest no-show rate day in any given practice. And so Miles, I know you mentioned you booked 50 patients on July 4th, and that sounds about right to our stats as well. It is probably one of the important days to think about is those holiday weeks, or if you have practices that close down during Christmas. You know, Christmas was on a Wednesday, and so the doc's like, I'm taking the whole week, and I'm like, how are you gonna pay your bills? And I don't think we could do that, but you know, and then you have staff fighting, they don't want to come in and work, and so you capture that you would have lost as well. And that answers your ROI. So going back, there's no question on the ROI, and that hasn't been the thing. It is conversion and getting up something new that is uncomfortable.
Yeah, just to elaborate on your question, I think there's 2 ways you could look at it. One, if they're less than 50% with a new patient volume that's declining and a production that's going down, then yes, this should be a no-brainer, right? Turn it on, get it in. The other thing you can use is if you have enough praxis, which clearly MB2 does, SGA right at 140, we just use our internal average performance. And if you're below the average, then hey, you're not even keeping up with theoretically the SGA average or the MB2 average. So if you have 30 offices, 20 offices, even 10 offices, use the average to engage with offices that are below that. And again, you move them, you're going to move your average up. And I would just think use your internal benchmark, right, as a reference point. That's really a good stat. And it's a lot easier to sort of just discuss it. And then the last thing Amy kind of alluded to was like, there is a volume, theoretically, like a volume of inbound calls that, you know, if you're only getting 20 inbound calls a month, okay, I could see potentially your skepticism to TrueLark, but again, turn it on, you could capture it. But, you know, let me just be frank, in order to break even with TrueLark, you need about 5 appointments per month, right? And we're averaging 25 appointments per month, right, with TrueLark. So again, tap and nail it, it's about 24, 25 appointments, and to pay for itself, and the upside is 5 appointments, that's like 1.2 per week. That seems pretty reasonable just in the after hours, and turning it on weekends and after hours, right? If you're a skeptic.
Getting the look from my marketing director in the back of the room that we're coming up on time. So before we wrap up, I don't know that we came to the conclusion of eliminating the front desk. I think it's more about augmenting the front desk and
Correct.
taking some of the transactional items off the plate so that they can focus on higher value activities and kind of rethinking, use of labor and rethinking, how to be efficient, how to scale. Before we break, I want to thank Miles for coming in via Zoom and making it happen, even though he wasn't able to make his flight. So appreciate that, Miles, and thank you, Amy, for sharing all your insight that you gave there too. And Topping, and everybody out here that joined us today. The other thing I was gonna mention, we love your feedback. So if you scan this QR code up here, you can actually get a $200 Amazon gift card. Give your feedback on the session.
The Andrew today.
What's that?
You said the Andrew.
The intern, okay, so anyway, Lisa's giving out $200 in cash. Yeah, we love your feedback. We want to keep improving on the quality of these sessions that we have. Did you guys find this useful? Did you feel like this, you're gonna walk away with some good? If you want to see a demo of TrueLark, certainly that is a possibility. We'll have this room, I think, Lisa, half the morning till noon, and then tomorrow I think we have it. And then also we have a booth out on the exhibit floor, so you can. Yep, so you can come by and visit us there, and we can actually get into looking at conversations, how does AI interact with some of these, use cases that people mentioned during the session.
Good job.
Thank you.
I did not. Gina had a
Oh,
question.
yeah, go for it.
Question, I just wanted to know, what's like the typical timeline for configuration and implementation start to?
Finish.
Yep.
So the typical, your first set of practices will probably take about 4 to 6 weeks to get up and running from a calendar time standpoint. In practice time and TrueLark time, it's usually more like a couple hours on the practice and a couple hours on the TrueLark side, but based on schedules and whatnot, you'll probably get the first practices live within that kind of 4 to 6 week range.
All right, everybody, have a wonderful show. Thank you.
Thanks, Miles.
Thank you.
Ready to roll, right? Yeah, then
Hi, I have some questions for you. We just